What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Simply Soccer podcast. Thank you all for joining me. Hopefully there's not so much noise in the background. I'm by a busy road right now. So there might be, if you hear it, I apologize in advance. So last time we went over a few of the mindsets in the last podcast are going to help you become more of a pro player. You know, a lot of these mindsets are ones I failed to develop in time, I would say, and I really encourage a lot of players to develop if they really want to pursue becoming a pro, or really just pursue becoming a better player in general. Because again, this is very underestimated. I get pushback sometimes, not from many people, but from some players who think these things are not important, but they can be the make or break points for a lot of you, where your head is at. And really, the game is so much mental. Like, it's unbelievably mental. And if you don't have that side figured out, if you don't have the right mindsets in place, that can really drag you down. Anyway, in this one, I'm going to kind of riff about a few things. I want to talk about certain things like how to train for your position. For example, I want to talk about, a few other things about how many players actually become pro and some things you can do in order to increase your chances. And, whatever else I can kind of get to in however much time I have. So let's get right into the first one, which is essentially how to train for your position, because I get this question sometimes. I actually made an Instagram post on this, going over it a little bit, and I want to go into it in a little more detail. And the post is just how to train for your position, and I go over three different things, and that's the fundamentals in general, fundamentals of position, and the X factor for position. So I want to dive into these a little more in more detail. You can go check out that post, and if you want to follow me on Instagram, I actually release a new post and then a new video, a new like drill or skill mini tutorial kind of on there every single day. So if you're not following me, go follow me. It's SimplySoccer Pro on Instagram. That's the handle name. It'll be linked down in the description as well. So what I talked about in that post, though, is there are three things you want to keep in mind, and there's more that goes into it, and I'm sure we'll get into that in this podcast because, I have more time now and I can actually dive a little more deeply into this. But there are a few things you want to keep in mind. And the first thing is the fundamentals in general. And I don't really care what position you play: striker, center mid, center defensive mid, winger, attacking center mid, right back, left back, center back, sweeper, if anyone plays sweeper anymore. It doesn't really matter to me. But if you don't have the general fundamentals of football developed to such a point where you can do them on command, you're going to struggle in any position. I don't care where you're at. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to just not be able to perform well, and you shouldn't even be thinking about the X factor or even the fundamentals of your position until you have the general fundamentals figured out. Because the fact of the matter is, I don't care what position you are, but if you don't have the fundamentals like ball control developed in your game to the point where you can play at whatever level you're at, you're going to struggle no matter what. And it doesn't matter what else I try and teach you. It doesn't matter what anyone else tries to teach you. If you can't control the ball, if you can't pass the ball, if you can't manipulate the ball in basic ways, if you don't have the IQ, the fundamental IQ that you need to play and operate in the game, it's not going to really matter. Anything else is really not going to matter, right? Because that's always going to come back to bite you. Now, I go over working on the fundamentals a lot. I even have a little series on my channel called The Fundamentals of Football, which we are going to keep doing, by the way. I'm just not doing them every single week now because that's just too hard to keep up with. So I'm basically having those videos made, and I want to make them really good as well. But you can take a look at the first two we've made, which are both on ball control. We're going to be doing passing, we're going to be doing shooting, all that kind of stuff. But these are the things you need to be really good at first. So in your training, I'd say almost every single day, you should have some fundamentals woven in there. And actually, if you look at one of my more recent videos called My Daily Soccer Routine, you can see that in that routine, I focus heavily on fundamentals like passing and ball control. Sometimes I'll do ball mastery, things of that nature, because I know how important these things are. And I know you can never be too good at the fundamentals. And the better you are at things like ball control, the better you are at things like passing and receiving, the better your football IQ is, for example. The better you're going to be as a player in general, no matter what position you're in. So understand that first and foremost. You might be trying to find that X factor for your game. You might be thinking like, how can I stand out? But first, make sure that you can hang before you try and stand out. Because if you can't even hang, if you can't even do the basics well, then you can forget about the stuff that's going to help you stand out, because the basics is 99% of the game. Most of the game you're going to be taking one touch, two touch, finding that pass, controlling the ball. These are the things you do most often, and you want to make sure the things you're doing most often you're a master at, or at least you're moving in that direction. So work on these fundamentals first, and then we can move on to the next thing, which is the fundamentals of your position. And so a few things play into this. Now, the reason I said this instead of just stopping at the fundamentals in general is because each position has certain fundamentals you need to be good at. And this is certain positional things. This is certain positions you need to be taking up. This is certain ideas. And a lot of this is going to be football intelligence because, for example, a striker given a certain role is going to have different things that he generally needs to do than a midfielder or a right back or center back or so on. So you need to find out what the fundamentals of your position are, and you need to become really good at these things as well. And again, this is before you even think about the X factor of your position. Now, the X factor, sorry, there's a plane going by. It's just going to happen because I'm near an airport. But the X factor of your position is usually going to be you doubling down on one of the fundamentals of your position. For example, the X factor could be you're an amazing crosser of the ball if you're a winger, and you have Beckham-like crossing ability, and that's the thing that helps you stand out. And there can be more than one X factor, but we'll get into that in a minute. But the fundamentals of your position. So for example, if you're a striker, what would some of the fundamentals of that position be? Well, what is it that mostly that a striker's asked to do? Now, there are different roles a striker has. There's a false nine role, which gets involved more with the build-up and the play and combining. There's a poacher and kind of player who plays off the shoulder. Think of like a Jamie Vardy who's asked to run in the channels, do a lot of hard work for the team, harass defenders up front, but is essentially that also poacher type player who looks to get in behind. There's target men like Giroud, who's going to be asked again to be on the last defender, but to hold the ball up. You can look at a Troy Deeney as well in this kind of position. A Glenn Murray. These guys are asked to hold the ball up and also get involved, to score goals from crosses and things of that nature. So you need to figure out exactly what type of role within your position you play as well, and what are the main things that you are asked to do in that position. So maybe you are a center midfield player that needs to control the tempo. You're like a Xavi or an Iniesta. Well, what is it you need to be working on? What are the fundamentals of that role within that position? So we're going beyond just your regular position, because as a center mid, for example, you need to be really good in tight space. You need to be able to combine with 1 and 2 touches in the middle. Yeah, that's great. But is there a specific role you're given in that position? Are you more attacking in the midfield? Are you seen more as a guy who links the defense to the offense? Are you seen more as a guy who needs to float into different positions and feed the strikers? What is your specific role? And you want to be working on the fundamentals of whatever that role is. Now, again, the general fundamentals for each position you also want to be working on. So let's get back to that center mid position. Any center midfield player, for example, needs to be able to receive the ball well and take their first touch out of their feet, or be able to keep it close to them to keep the ball, or be able to operate in tight space. I would say every center midfield player needs to be able to do that. They need to be able to know what to do within 1 or 2 touches. They need to know a few moments ahead what they're going to do, be able to act instinctually, find teammates quickly, move the ball quickly. Those are all general fundamental things of that position. But again, to go even deeper, look at your specific role in whatever your position is. Are you an attacking center mid, for example? That's going to be a little bit different. There are more things to focus on, like finding those spaces between the midfield and defensive lines of the opposition, right? Knowing where your striker is at all times and having that almost telepathy with them so you can combine with them quickly, put them in on goal very quickly. So this is going to be, I'm not going to go over every position because this is going to vary, but first thing is figure out what are the fundamentals of your position in general. So we'll go as far as saying center backs, outside backs, midfielders, wingers, strikers. And then you can go even more specific once you figure that out by going, okay, am I a winger? Am I a winger like a Mo Salah, which almost plays in kind of a striker role and a winger role, where he comes inside a lot, he'll find himself in that striker role a lot? Or am I more of a wide man like a Robin or Ribéry, who is tasked with being out wide and kind of coming in, getting those crosses in, for example? Drawing the differences, for example, between a Robin and a Salah. You don't usually see Salah, for example, crossing the ball. Liverpool's outside backs usually take care of that. We don't really have wingers that go for that, or they'll be played back to the midfield to quickly whip in the ball. But Salah and Mane, for example, don't usually look to play in those traditional type of crosses, where a player like a Robin or a Ribéry might, a player back in the day like Beckham might. So what type of role there are you playing? For a striker, for example, are you more of a target man? Are you more of someone who links the play up? Are you more of a Roberto Firmino type player who's a false nine? You're not always asked to make the goals, but you're asked to kind of be the playmaker as well as that guy who is up front. What is your role? For example, Firmino, the other day against Watford, he was instrumental in, I believe, Liverpool's first goal, where he cut back, received the ball, and played a really nice through ball to Mane, who then cut it back for Salah to score. But he also got involved and scored a goal himself. But what I'm saying is there's going to be different roles. There are poachers. Like Inzaghi was one of the best poachers in his day, and his job was really to get in the box, get onto rebounds, and score goals. And that was his main thing, right? So what is your role specifically within your position? And some of you might not even know. Like, you may not be on a team where your coach gives you specific tactics for your role. Now, as you get into the higher levels, you will. When you get into the college game, I can tell you, you're going to have your coach. Most good coaches are going to give you specific roles that fit within the tactics of the team. Better club teams will do that as well. My club team, when I was younger, we did that. When we were going to state ranked and all this kind of stuff, state ranked tournaments and all that kind of stuff, it gets more to that level. When you're in the pro game, I can't imagine really many pro teams that don't have specific roles for most positions. Of course, you'll be asked to do the general stuff for that position as well, but if you're a target man, it's going to be different than someone who's running in behind. If you're, a midfielder who is supposed to control the tempo, it's going to be different than a midfielder who's, a box-to-box midfielder, for example. So figure out what that is for you. And again, if you don't have that kind of role, maybe you can even analyze your own team's tactics and see what kind of role would be best suited for your team that you can bring to the team. Or you can, again, just work on the general stuff for your position. Okay? So I hope that makes a lot of sense. So far we've gone over the fundamentals in general, which are just the fundamentals of football. Things like ball control, which I consider the most important fundamental. That includes first touch, all that kind of stuff. That includes passing and receiving. Receiving also, of course, a part of first touch and ball control. That includes, to me, also things like positioning and your football intelligence. Those are fundamentals. Okay, but then there's the fundamentals of position, right? So what are the fundamentals in general of your position? Like, what is your position usually asked to do? Get really good at those things. Then go even deeper and go, what is the role, or what is the fundamentals of my role within my position? So you can go even deeper with that. All right, so once you have those lists, and again, guys, it's going to be different for each of you, so I would really get really clear on what this is, because the more clarity you have, the more you'll know, the more you can do, the more you'll know what to work on. For example, when I played striker in college, I knew one of my main things was not only to score goals, but I did actually play in almost a false nine type of role. Sometimes I'd be on the shoulder and I would know what to do, but I loved to come back in the midfield and link play up. That was something I did, but I was also tasked with scoring, so I worked on my finishing heavily. And because of that, even though I only got 1 or 2 chances a match, I wasn't the guy who was the poacher, right? I wasn't scoring these tap-in goals all the time, but because I worked on my finishing, I was still scoring a lot of goals, right? So that was me doing something deliberately I knew would have an impact in my game. And now we're actually going to get into that, which is the X factor of your position. And I think every player should have this. There are a ton of players who can do everything in general, like the general stuff, the general ball control, passing, receiving, the general stuff for their position well. But you won't find that every player has the X factor in their game. And let me explain what that means. And I mean, this is like when you're on the pitch, you are the best at this one thing, or maybe even a couple things. And you always know these players. For example, I could use David Beckham again. What was David Beckham known for? He was known for his incredible crossing ability. He was known for his free kicks as well. That was another X factor he had. But sometimes people forget that David Beckham was good at a lot of things. David Beckham actually almost won the Ballon d'Or. He came second once. Like, whatever your preconceived notions about him are, he was an incredible footballer who played for some of the best teams in the world and won almost everything with them. But he still had that X factor. There's a reason people remember him for his crossing and his free kicks, because that was his X factor. That was what he was so good at. He was better than everyone else. There was not a better crosser in the game than David Beckham when he was playing. And you just need to look at some of the deliveries he put on a plate for his strikers consistently when he was playing to know that. But that was his X factor. That was something he doubled down on. That was something that he was so good at because he probably put so much deliberate training into that he stood out. That you knew when David Beckham had the ball in the wing and you were a striker, that he's going to put it exactly where it needs to be. And you also knew when you hit a free kick that you always had a chance of scoring because you had David Beckham in your team. So that's an example of his X factor. Now, all wingers and wide men, in my opinion, should be great at crossing but Beckham took it one step further and was sensational at it. Okay? An X factor for you might be your finishing ability. You look at certain strikers and you look like at Aguero, for example, when he gets a chance, you know he's going to score. Suarez, especially when he was at Liverpool during his later time there, like as a Liverpool supporter myself, every time he got an opportunity, you knew he was going to score. Like you just knew he was going to score every game. You know how incredible of an X factor that is? And that's not by accident. I guarantee he worked on it. I guarantee, that he worked on things that gave him that X factor. You look at a player like Xavi and Iniesta, their ability to create was an X factor. Xavi's ability to control the game was an X factor. Pirlo as well, his playmaking ability was an X factor. For certain defenders, their reading of the game, positional sense, Van Dijk. John Terry was an expert at this back in his day. He recently retired, but he was one of the best in the world at this, in anticipating what was going to happen and reading the game. Mats Hummels is another one who's good at this company. Certain goalkeepers are incredible shot stoppers or are incredible with their feet. Teams are now buying goalkeepers because they're good at distribution and they're great at their feet. That is an X factor. Not every goalie can do that. Not every goalie can distribute the ball like De Gea or like an Alisson or like Man City's goalie whose name Ederson. Is it Ederson? I think so. That's an X factor they have. And yes, they're good at everything else they need to be doing. But Alisson isn't the best shot stopper in the world. He's still world class at it probably, but he's not the best. But he's one of the best at distributing the ball. De Gea is probably one of the best shot stoppers. Now that I think about it, he's one of those guys that has so many X factors, he becomes one of the best in the world, right? When you have so many X factors, that's what happens. You become one of the best. Like Messi has the X factor in every area: his dribbling, his shooting, his finishing, his passing. But what is it? What is the one X factor? And this is what I'm trying to get at. It's no good to be a defender whose X factor is goal scoring. And it's no good to be a striker whose X factor is tackling. What is the X factor you can develop for your position that is going to help you stand out in your position? So this is beyond just becoming masterful at the fundamentals, which also is going to be really good. A player I really loved was Zidane, and one of the reasons I loved him is because he had mastered the simple stuff. And he was able to combine that simple stuff in such an intelligent way that he made him one of the best, in my eyes, of all time. Like, I honestly think he's in the argument for one of the best ever. He's one of those guys who should be in there. I have not witnessed another player even close to as being as unique as him. And the unique thing about him is he just made the game seem so simple by doing just these simple things masterfully. So even that can eventually become an X factor if you really get good at it. But the point is, think of your position again. And think of like the one thing you can double and triple down on that maybe you're already pretty good at, but you can get so good at it that it becomes this X factor for you. It becomes something that's just gives you the edge in matches. For me, when I was playing in college, it was my finishing. It was me knowing that if I got an opportunity to score, that I was going to take it, even with fewer chances. For you, it might be your ability to take players one-on-one. Maybe your X factor is almost every time you take someone one-on-one, you're able to beat them and open up chances for your team. Maybe as a defender, it is you are so precise with your tackling that almost no one can beat you, that you can make every last-ditch challenge. You're able to read what players are going to do, whatever it is, and you work on that so much, you become so good at it that it helps you stand out. Maybe you become so good at your positioning. Maybe your passing is so good that you never misplace a pass, that you're able to play that through ball accurately every time, that creative pass. Maybe it's you can strike a ball so cleanly. Harry Kane, one of his X factors is he can just strike a ball so cleanly, and it helps him with his finishing and goal scoring. So think about it. What is your X factor? And what can it be? And again, you want to pick the thing, and this is what's important. You want to pick the thing that's going to actually have a resounding impact in your matches. Again, if you're a winger, that might be your crossing ability. It might be that you're able to whip in a dangerous cross almost every time. You look at a player like Trippier, it's the first person who came to my mind, who has an incredible crossing ability. They call him the something Beckham, like I forget, whatever area in England he's from. They call him that Beckham because his free kick taking ability and his crossing is so good. And that's become an X factor for him. He's assisted so many people, Harry Kane being one of them, so much because of that. He's forced his way into the England setup because of his deliveries as well. And of course, he's good at everything else, but that's one of his X factors. And trust me, one of the most frustrating things about a wide player, whether a right or left back or a winger, is when they cannot cross the ball. Seriously, it is one of the most frustrating things as a striker when you're playing with someone like that, and it's one of the most frustrating things watching it, like watching your team play, and an opportunity for maybe even like a simple cross, and they just botch it completely, or a player, a wide man who the whole game their crossing has just been off. To have a player who can hit that cross almost every time, or even the majority of the time, is an X factor. So maybe that's something for you, right? So I want you to start thinking about what that can be for you. What can that X factor be? Again, you want all this other stuff first. Like, again, if your fundamentals in general are poor, don't even start thinking about the X factor, because it won't matter, because you won't even be able to function in a game properly if your fundamentals are poor. Fundamentals of position, again, you're going to struggle if you don't have those down. Like, if you don't know how to play your position, you don't know how to play the role in your position effectively, and the X factor is not going to matter. But once you have those two and you're working towards those and you're getting better and better at those, you really want to start thinking about this X factor. Okay? So seriously, start thinking about this. This can help you stand out in major ways. This will help you stand out in front of scouts. It will help you stand out on your team and become more valuable for your team. Where they know now if they take you out of the game and don't play you, it's like, oh, we're going to miss out on that crossing ability that can change a match. Oh, we're going to miss out on his reading of the game. Or we're going to miss out on his finishing ability. That becomes so valuable to a team if you have that X factor and you're able to consistently produce that. That becomes something that is notably missing if you're not playing in the game. That's another way of looking at it. Like, if you were taken out of the game, like, you're a standout player that if you're taken out of the team or out of the game, there's an obvious difference, or there is something missing, right? So, like, if you're taken out of the game and your team just struggles to score when you're in there, or you're taken out of the game and just the midfield battle, they're just not winning it as much. Like, imagine taking a Roy Keane out of Manchester United back in the day. There's a noticeable difference. Imagine taking a Steven Gerrard out of Liverpool at any time. Huge there, and I can tell you there were periods when he wasn't in the team through injury or something. Huge, mega difference. Why? Because he stood out. So this is just stuff that's going to help you do that, and that X factor is going to help you stand out. All right, so cool. That took us to 22 minutes, which is pretty cool. So what was the other thing? Oh yeah, I just want to go over something with becoming a pro, because I know a lot of you have dreams of doing that, and ultimately I'm a believer, you want to keep that dream in mind, especially if you want it, and you have to commit to it, by the way. It can't just be something you're interested in. If you want to become a pro, again, I think less than 1% of all people who play football ever become a pro, and I mean at any level. I mean, like, even fourth tier in some country. Like, to get paid to play football, to play any sport really, at a professional level where you are getting paid at any degree to play with a contract with a club, less than 1% of any player gets to do that. It is an absolute privilege, and there are players who work their absolute ass off to get even one game at the professional level. And I'm not telling this to you to discourage you. I'm telling this to you because I want you to know this is not something you can just do bare minimum on and get in. Why is it I didn't become a pro? And actually, to be fair, I was offered a contract at, I think, a fourth or third tier in the States at the time, and I couldn't through injury. But the thing is also, I was injured because of stupid things I had done, because I didn't do everything I could have done to look after myself. And you go back, and I had taken care of things back then, I probably would have been able to sign that contract. I probably maybe would have ahead of time, right? And that's not for me trying to look back and look at regrets. I love my life and I love what I'm doing, and I actually don't have any regrets. Sure, there would be certain things I would tell my younger self if I went back, but I'm very thoroughly enjoy my life, so don't think that's an excuse of any nature. But what I'm trying to get across to you is I was always a talented player, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it. I was always one of the players that was one of the better in every team I was in, very skillful, and obviously had really good ability, but I didn't apply myself as much as the players that went on to become pro. There's a reason no one becomes a pro by accident. Let's put it that way. So how committed are you? And I'm giving you this statistic of only less than 1% of players become pro. That might not be exact. It might be 1%, it might be 2%. But it's probably very low. It's probably less than 1 ever go on to play even one game at the professional level or get paid to play. And so when you look at that, you have to think, well, if only 1% or less than 1% of players are becoming pro, and it's probably even less than 1% who want to go pro, become pro. What is it I have to do to be within that 1%? Obviously, you can't be doing what everyone else is doing, because that's the 99% of people, right? You can't be doing what they're doing. And you obviously have to do more than what they're doing, right? You have to be doing something different. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. And I made a post about this, and I went over some of the things I believe separates pros from amateurs and some of the things that they do. And again, this is not a talent thing. This is not a ability thing, because that gap can be bridged based on what you do. But for me, a pro is someone who puts in deliberate practice, and an amateur is someone who puts in unstructured practice, practice without structure. So what are those things? So deliberate practice is when you go to the field and you train in a deliberate way. Like you have analyzed your game, you have clarity on what your weaknesses and strengths are, and you go to the field with a deliberate purpose. You go to the gym with a deliberate purpose. You are doing things for specific results. And you can get very deliberate and very subtle and intricate with it too, where you're working on, like again, maybe your X factor. You're specifically at the field, maybe working on that specific thing in matches. You might even be specifically working on one type of situation. You know, you look at Robin, for example, and his ability to cut inside and score. Like, I guarantee he works on that all the time. That's deliberate practice, because he's seen that that works in matches all at the professional level all the time against the best players in the world, and he worked on that to the point where he's so good at it. I bet you he deliberately practiced that very often. So that's the difference. Deliberate practice. Unstructured practice is when you kind of go to the field and you kind of just mess about for an hour or two. You don't really have a plan. You don't really know what you're doing. You're not, you kind of just, and there's nothing wrong with having that kind of training session every now and then, maybe on a rest day, or when you just, you want to have fun. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't kid yourself and then go to the field and do that as your main training session and then say you're actually putting in the work, because you're not. Because there's so much more you could be doing. I get players who tell me they practice an hour or two a day. It doesn't matter how long you're practicing. What are you doing during that hour or 2 hours? Because someone who's deliberately training for those 2 hours is doing way more, or even someone who's deliberately training for an hour, in my eyes, is doing way more towards their growth as a player than someone who goes to the pitch and does whatever for 2 unstructured things. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Are you deliberately training, or is it unstructured? Number 2 is an obvious one, is they put in the work. The pro puts in the work. And when I say pro guys, I mean the guys who are either already pro or pursuing it in a very real way, where they actually are making it their lifestyle. This has to become a lifestyle, guys. So when you put in the work, that means you're prioritizing your growth as a footballer. Your whole life is revolving around it: what you eat, what you do, not going out at night, how you sleep, what you do during training, resting, everything, recovery. Your whole life becomes about the process. Where an amateur, it's not a priority. They might train every now and then, but they hang out with their friends more than they train, or they go partying, or they watch TV when they could be doing something like studying a match. And again, there's nothing wrong with relaxing. That's not what I'm saying, but relax after you've trained. Relax after you've done what you need to do. Relax after you've put everything in that you can. Relax as you have a rest day. Is it a priority for you? Because if it's not, there's almost no chance you're going to become a pro. And again, this is not to discourage people. This is just I really want to paint a picture here, because, I've seen players that have gone on to become pros, and I've seen players like myself who went on to not. And there are obvious differences. Not in ability necessarily. There is that too sometimes, a lot of times, but also in what they are doing on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, yearly, the work they put in. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, am I making it a priority, or am I allowing instant gratification to win out over discipline? Am I allowing, myself to play video games instead of putting the extra work that I need to be putting in? Again, 1% or less of players become pros. So if you're playing video games instead, watching Netflix all the time, eating junk food, you're doing what the 99% does. You're not doing what that 1% does. Get in the mindset of, how can I start doing what the 1% is doing? Or the less than 1%, really. And the next thing I put on this post was, pros learn fast, where amateurs learn slowly. And this is kind of two-pronged. And what this means is, a pro are people who are actually pursuing it in a very real way. They learn quickly from their mistakes, first and foremost. So they don't keep making the same mistakes over and over again. They're very aware. They have a lot of clarity on what their mistakes are, because they're not afraid to confront their mistakes. They understand they're not perfect, and they understand also that it's the struggles, the mistakes, the failures, the bad games that they're going to learn the most from. I don't know how many amazing athletes have to come out and say this before people start to realize this is the case, but you will learn more from your defeats, your struggles, your failures than you will from your victories. The failure is just the stepping stone towards success. The bad game is a stepping stone towards a good game if you allow it to be. But if you complain, if you blame, if you do all that stuff, then you're just going to continue having those bad games until you learn the lesson that you need to learn. And so you need to learn quickly by being very honest about your mistakes. It's really hard, honestly, sometimes, not anymore, but it was very hard to admit to myself that the reason I didn't become a pro, especially when I had opportunities, was because I didn't put in the work. I didn't look after my body. I was the one to blame. Taking that responsibility for the first time in your life isn't fun, but it's necessary, because through that I grew. Through that I realized, when I want something in life, I have to do certain things and I have to take responsibility for it. And it's helped me now because I learned that lesson. Yes, I would have been great to learn that lesson at 13, but I didn't. And now is now, and there's no point in reflecting upon that now. But the point is, I didn't learn fast enough, and I don't want you to fall for the same thing. I want you to recognize you need to be learning fast now. And learning fast is not something that one person can do and one person cannot. You can start learning fast immediately, but you need to face your mistakes and failures head on, and you need to not shy away from them. You need to realize what they are. If your shooting sucks and you're a striker, you need to admit that, then go to the field and work on it. If you had a poor game, you don't make excuses about, the circumstances. Find out why you had a poor game and work on those things. So the pro does that. They learn fast. And they also learn from an open-mindedness kind of way. So not just from their mistakes, but they learn from other people's mistakes. When a pro writes a book and then goes over this incredible mistake he made, and you should probably avoid that mistake if you can. You don't need to make the mistake to experience the growth necessarily. You can learn from other people's mistakes. Don't deliberately make mistakes, but when you do, because you inevitably will, you learn from them. But another thing is also, again, is learn quickly in the sense of being open-minded and allowing new techniques to come through, because you might be putting in an incredible amount of work doing certain drills, but then maybe these new drills come in and you see these professionals doing certain drills and you're like, oh, it's the same area, but these are better. That's why you want to be open to learning other things too, learning more about how to become a better player more efficiently and faster, learning more about how to take care of your body more, continually learning these things that are only going to aid you on your journey to become a better footballer. And again, the amateur learns slowly. The amateur blames others. The amateur blames circumstances for why they don't perform well. The amateur won't confront their failures or their mistakes. And again, the failures and mistakes are not bad things, guys. They're fine. I know it's scary to face them because in today's society, for some reason, we think failures and mistakes are terrible things, but they're great. Get excited when you realize the mistakes you're making, because that is the first step towards growth. That is the first step towards you becoming a better player, is recognizing your mistakes and failures and then learning from them. It is the first step towards becoming better. But if you never face those mistakes and failures and you try and hide away and you try and blame and you try and not take responsibility, you're not going to become better, and it's going to hurt you. You're going to just progress super slowly when you could be progressing so much faster. And another thing about learning slowly is they're not usually open-minded. They aren't open to new methods. And again, just because there are new methods doesn't mean you should immediately take that method, but do your research. See if it will be applicable to you. Have a foundation, but see if there are things you could bring within that foundation to make it an even stronger bedrock, an even stronger foundation. Okay? So those are some ideas that will help you to just grow faster as a player. And we're getting towards the end of this, guys, so this has been great. I've very much enjoyed, hold on a second here, mic just got a bit messed up. I very much enjoyed doing this. I hope you have as well. Leave me any other questions you want me to answer in a podcast. I know in the last one I said we'll be doing this weekly, but obviously I'm having trouble committing to that, so we'll just do these when I can do them. Whatever. This one will be premiered. I think what we're going to do is every single time I have a podcast, I will do it as a premiere, so you know when it's coming out, and so you can also ask me questions live. You'll notice that I'm here with you live answering your questions during these podcasts. So if you want your questions answered in real time by me. This is almost like, it's cool. It's like a mixture of a live stream and a podcast, because here's the podcast and the information I want to get out to you. But also you can ask your questions about it in the live stream and I'll answer you. And also there's some great people in the community who I'm sure are answering you as well. Everyone always helps each other out when we do these, which is fantastic. I love that. Keep doing that. Keep supporting and helping each other. You know, community is so important. Having people with similar goals, doing similar things is so important. Your environment is so important. That includes those people. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. Please hit that like button. You know, honestly, please, you know, share these videos and these podcasts. That just helps them get out to more people. It helps the channel grow. It helps me continue to do all the stuff that I'm doing. So honestly, the more you watch these, like them, share them, interact with them, really, the better for the channel. And you know, I just really appreciate that very much, guys. So we'll do a hashtag. Let's go. Hashtag 1%. Let's do that. So you can do hashtag 1% and spell it out, or you can do hashtag 1 and then percentage sign, all one word. And what that means, for those of you who are new, if you put the hashtag in the comments, it just helps me to acknowledge you for listening, and I want to send my appreciation your way by commenting or hearting your comment. It also means if you ask me a question in the comment with that hashtag, I will either answer you in the comments if I can, or I will actually use your topic in a future podcast. So the reason I do that is because I only want to offer that to people who actually invest the time to listen to these. And so I really appreciate you doing that. I know some people will just go in the comments and actually just find the hashtag and do that. Please don't do that. Don't be deceitful, but I can't do anything about that, unfortunately. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for helping make this channel what it is. You know, it's not just me. You know, I may have started it, but you guys have helped it grow to what it is today. And I appreciate all of you for that. And I really hope I can continue to create content that helps you grow as a footballer and as a person as well. Thanks, guys, so much. And I will see you in the next video or podcast or whatever else. Cheers.